Hi, folks. Welcome to another Value Stream Show session. What we're going to do today is step a little bit backwards and go through some of the kind of foundational ideas of the podcast, introduce ourselves, introduce some of the ideas, some of the context around this podcast and what we're trying to do with the conversations here. So, because we heard from you that we kind of skipped ahead to content and kind of jumped into talking about the subject matter. So just to make sure that we bring everybody along and everybody is starting from where we are, let's cover the basics. So Andrew, let's do introductions. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you sort of got to this point today.
Yeah. So my name's Andrew Davis. I work for Copado, as a company focused on DevOps for low-code platforms like Salesforce. And my background, I had studied engineering, I suppose, is where a lot of these roots are. And I was a math science nerd when I was a little kid. So everything is always sort of converges on maximizing this and minimizing that, and how can you optimize things. And you pretty quickly get into designing systems, and you realize there's a whole lot of interconnections, just a whole lot of places things can go wrong. And so I've always had some. I think that the engineering school probably drilled into me this passion for optimization as well, doing software development and trying to, simplify this and so forth. I've always really enjoyed that challenge of how to optimize systems. So that's some of it. I got into, I've been an IT generalist, moving in and around different IT topics for my whole career, and got into Salesforce development, software development, then got into how to optimize the software development process for Salesforce teams, because there's an enormous amount of inefficiency typically in these team processes. So I started looking at all of the classic stuff that we bucket under the umbrella of DevOps these days, so version control and deployment automation, automated testing, and quality and security scanning, these kinds of things. And then as I kept pulling the threads on that, encountering things like value stream mapping and value stream management, and the broader DevOps conferences, like DevOps Enterprise Summit, it was really, really mind-opening, and I've just delighted in the intellectual breadth that's being covered in these conferences. The number of thinkers about human factors engineering and cognitive complexity and just theory of constraints and how to optimize value streams. And so I became quite passionate about this. And then Steve, you and I met a couple of years ago and decided to work together on a book on this topic of value stream management, among other things. But maybe it's a good segue over to you. So how did you get involved in this?
Yeah. Well, I think that, we kind of share that interest in the big picture and like the why of things and how things fit together. And that's part of what formed this foundation for our friendship and these conversations that we've had. That's always been kind of a focus of mine. Like I've always been an ideas person. I've always been sort of wandering through different ways of seeing the world, but through a technical lens. Like I grew up fairly technical. My dad was a technician and then a manager at Bell. And so I was always kind of bumping into technology, usually taking it apart and putting it back together again, trying to get things to work. But I suppose, value streams kind of became appealing to me because they are one part about process and how things work. But also, I'm not really a process oriented person, as you know, Andrew, and I'm not sure that the listeners know that, I really struggle with like getting things done the same way consistently out the door. Because I'm always thinking about, the distant future, or like the big picture. I'm zoomed out all the time. So that means that I'm kind of fascinated by process, right? And how to make things work well, because it doesn't come naturally to me. So I've been sort of fascinated by these stories of organizations where they kind of get a handle on things, and um, get this level of visibility and consistency or measurement or improvement from looking at the big picture, but kind of digging a little bit deeper into how is all this working and how can we make it work better. So my first real understanding of value streams in a technical context came also from the DevOps Enterprise Summit. And I thought, those stories of kind of like the big picture, and how folks were looking at an organization in terms of flow, and how they were using value streams as a model to look beyond those typical silos of IT and software development, and incorporating kind of the business and customers and stuff like that. I think that that really appealed to me because it kind of checks the big picture box, but also checks the process and the mechanism and like how everything fits together box. So that kind of brought me here. And I also think, there's just, I see a lot of potential with that, but also not a lot of people talking about it, or really working in that space. There's a lot of interest, but there's a huge lack of kind of content and common understanding. So I just always felt like there was an opportunity there. And I think, we both recognize that opportunity, and rather than be sitting on the sidelines, we felt kind of compelled to be uncovering this or working it out in public to try and help move that forward. So that's kind of my interest in how I got here. But like, what, Andrew, like, what do you see as the why of this? Like, what resonates the most for you about value streams, and this idea of like looking at the work, and kind of the people involved in the work, or is it other things or something else?
Yeah, and so why focus on value streams? Why do a podcast here, for example? I think some of it is, as you and I started having these conversations around the book, we realized there was a wealth of enthusiasm that both of us brought, and ideas, and a lot of cross pollination of ideas, and we just had such a good time talking together. We just thought we should probably move this conversation into a public forum so other folks could benefit as well. Back to your broader topic about why value streams, it's interesting. It really feels like it brings a number of, the idea of value stream optimization or management brings a number of key points together. The two big ones in my mind are humanizing the work process so that the individual contributors really have a better sense of what they're doing, what's the big picture that they're operating in, and they have a sense of purpose and flow and meaning in their work by virtue of, making changes and then seeing them get out to production and get in use and getting feedback relatively quickly, right? So that it's the old idea of continuous delivery, increasing motivation, right? It increases the motivation of the participants. At the same time, it is a massive boon for the overall effectiveness of organization. So it checks the box of helping the business to be more effective. It checks the box of helping the individuals to be more effective. And then I think critically, it checks the box of helping the customers to get maximum benefit from the contributions of the individual participants. Because basically, where the employees and the individual contributors are not feeling very engaged, or there's a long delay between the work that they do and getting it out to the end users and so forth, the system you're building isn't adapting to feedback, certainly not in any quick way. It can take months, years to implement feedback if you ever get around to it. So the system's not evolving. It's not necessarily tuned to the needs of the customers. The team itself is not even necessarily thinking about the customers. The relationship with the customers is the process is so slow, basically, that the customers feel impossibly distant from the work that we're doing right now. And thus our attention shifts away from the customer, and it shifts towards, the next, nearest source of importance and power and authority, which may be our boss or maybe, ourself or our coworkers or whatever. And we make decisions just because we're doing what we're supposed to do, or we think we're supposed to do, but we don't make decisions on behalf of the customer, right? So it's, with the scale of the organizations that we're operating in right now, it is very, very hard to see the big picture if you're doing one little task. So I think this, by speeding things up and making them small and creating value streams that are relatively self-contained, then you've got the opportunity to take more advantage of the innate human tendency to want to be doing something meaningful and serving a customer and getting feedback and improving a product. And all of that is totally natural, and we've lost a lot of that natural human potential.
Yeah, I think that really resonates with me. That idea of the problem for individual contributors as the industry kind of evolves and capabilities reach higher levels of evolution. This like complication goes up. Like the web of an organization just becomes more and more complicated, and it's harder to see, the individual impact of any specific effort, and it's harder to feel like you understand how you can move the lever or the dial or move things forward. And that can be, I've been in that situation many, many times, just feeling like, I'm doing something, it's on the backlog, so I know it needs to be done, but I'm not quite sure why. And I'm not quite sure how best to do it because I'm missing a lot of context. And so one of the things that I really like about the value stream is like it gives you a much more context than you would typically have working in kind of an agile team, or your typical agile team, I should say. Like a common pattern is to kind of work on what you think is the most important thing. And there's just like, it's very challenging to have really high signal communication with the business that is usually much closer to customers and much closer to the vision, much closer to the organizational initiatives that are really going to make a large impact. And it's easy to sort of get distracted by the things that are immediately around you, or, based on your most recent experience. All these natural biases kind of like seep into our decision making. So having a model that allows you to kind of step back and see a bigger picture and put things in different areas and see how they fit together, it's really appealing. But the other thing that I like a lot is, as a technical leader, a value stream gives me a way of talking to folks who are more, let's say, in closer proximity to the customer, or higher up in leadership, and speak a language that they understand, right? They understand value, they understand customer impact, they understand delivery in a broad sense, in a sense of like delivering to customers, delivering value to customers, getting customer feedback, having that kind of influence what we do. They understand constraints, they understand flow, and they don't necessarily have to understand a lot of technical details if you give them a model of a value stream, because you're usually speaking the same language ultimately if you use a value stream and constraints. And like, here's where work is piling up, here's where we've got lots of delay, we've got lots of waste. Like all that kind of is in the lexicon of both camps, or all the camps in the organization, right? I mean, it's understood by HR, design, sales. they can all kind of participate in that conversation as equals. And I really like that. That's saved me a lot of misunderstanding. Um, but I guess, the other question is, we see a lot of value in this, but why do you think, Andrew, this is the right time to be talking about value streams?
Yeah, I think we've built the basic foundations and the basic prerequisites in our organizations. There's a fairly certainly within software development teams, which is our origins, your and my origins. We've built the basic foundations of understanding agile, that you need to have an agile approach, that DevOps, there needs to be some automation through that the technical practices of rolling out changes quickly and so forth are critically important. The next phase certainly seems to be and so the next question then is, if you need to be agile and you've got to automate and ease the rolling out of changes, then what changes do you make? What is it that you're building? Who are you working with? These broader questions. And then what's the impact you have on the organization? And is the organization itself, within the broader organization within which you're operating, are they structured? Is that organization structured in such a way as to be able to facilitate that rapid delivery of value, rapid evolution, and so forth? And so really, you and I discussed, we see value stream management as the evolution of DevOps, is really growing out of this, underlying just this broad extension. In a sense, actually, DevOps was just one small case or one small subset of lean management, lean manufacturing, and so forth. But we're bringing, as you say, we're finding a common lexicon with lean thinking, which can be applied to any part of the organization. So really trying to mature our thinking about the software development process to be more broad and generic, so that these same concepts, the same language that we're applying internally to development teams can be applied more broadly about what's our company doing, how's the product operating, and so forth. And so you and I also had not found a book that we thought really spoke to this need in the software development space in a way that was brief and practical. And as well, podcasts on the topic were not easy to find. So hence we're here having this conversation. Steve, did I miss anything?
No, I like what you covered. I think that the one thing that stands out to me about where we are with the state of DevOps and Agile and software delivery is kind of that a lot of those are easily misunderstood, right? And they have been since they've kind of gained popularity. And I found that to be very frustrating, and I think it's very frustrating to folks who are trying to get a handle on this, and having conversations with business folks who come from operating organizations or running companies. And, this prospect of, you need to understand, first of all, you need to understand dev, and you need to understand ops, and you need to understand, why we need site reliability engineering and all of this technical detail can kind of go right over their heads if they don't have something to kind of place it in a context that they understand. And, the other thing that often happens is that DevOps to one person is technical. It's about automation. To another person, it's about culture, and it's about like bringing people together and having conversations between potentially rivalrous groups in an organization, or folks that don't necessarily work together can talk to each other productively. And so, all of that makes it challenging to kind of make progress, because you spend a lot of time just establishing terms, like what are we actually talking about? And I think that the value stream gives us a little boost. I think honestly, it gives us a big boost. We're talking about outcomes from the start. We're talking about value from the start. We're talking about flow from the start. Like there's really not a lot of room for misinterpretation there. I love that about it. And so I think, for folks who are thinking about, okay, well, we've got this DevOps thing sort of figured out. We feel good about what we're doing. What's next? Well, if you look at, the scope of Agile and the scope of DevOps, the scope of the value stream is really kind of the everything of delivering customer value, the start to finish. And it's a model also for looking at the organization as like a network of all these flows, which depend on each other and impact each other. And I think that's a big advantage, because that's something that we've been missing kind of in the lexicon too, to have conversations about, like, well, we can't get our stuff done because of this and this and this and this and these other groups in the organization, and we don't want that to come across as contentious or complaining about those groups. It's really a question of architecture of what we're trying to build, but also architecture of the organization, the team organization, and how we model the business. And so modeling the business according to flow is a lot easier when you're thinking in terms of value streams. So I think we're there. I think we're bumping up. We've seen, if people follow the State of DevOps report, we've been making really great progress there. And I think that the next step of that is looking broader and looking at how we organize organizations. We've seen a lot of good cases of these organizations becoming more streamlined. Team topologies is extremely popular because it introduces like a way of talking about teams in terms of flow. And I think that, that's part of that is made a lot easier when you are using a value stream as a model.
Yeah, I mean, team topologies talks about stream-aligned teams, which are basically value streams. The organization is a large system, and I think this is, systems thinking continues to try to break into the way we think about businesses and the way we think about every aspect of our life, and it does require, a couple of additional layers of, sophistication in thought compared to just simple linear thinking. But it's still shocking to me how it's not yet universal for people to recognize, system dynamics or to make that explicit. And we can think basically the organization is an incredibly vast, system, all kinds of complex interrelationships and so forth. But within that, you get these small pockets that are simple, linear, repeatable processes. And where you have such a simple, linear, repeatable process, that's also a system. It's a linear system. It's a system that may have other, sources of interference, sources of interruption, and so forth. But nevertheless, it's a system in the sense that you can't understand the functioning of the system by looking at any one of those parts in isolation. So if I'm if I, as a developer, am not getting, some parts of my work done, well, what is the root cause of that? Well, maybe it's I'm not motivated to do my job, and that could be one issue that people get concerned about. But it's also very possible that I've not gotten clear requirements for my job, for my work up front, or I don't have the proper tools and so forth. And really looking at what are the actual inhibitors. Are they internal, psychological inhibitors, or technical inhibitors, or lack of process, or lack of raw materials? I'm not getting the source information I need, and so forth. There's a lot of things that could be inhibiting my ability to be effective. And we've got to look at each of the nodes in the value stream, so to speak, systemically, recognizing that there's a lot that might aid or interfere with the activities of one individual. But as well, you can't produce the product without this coordination of activities through this linear system. Somebody does the planning, I do the development, somebody else does the testing, the deploying, the monitoring and maintenance, and so forth. So it is kind of the tip of the spear of systems thinking, because it does give you this linear result in the sense of you've got a linear process, which you can say, hey, we've made it 30% faster, 60% faster. Whatever. So it's kind of a transition or kind of a bridge between a broader systems thinking and then the kind of linear results that companies have been entrained to look for and hope for and expect. And so it's, I think it's significant from that point of view as well.
Yeah, I think that the call out about systems thinking is a good one. We could spend a lot of time. We'll probably have to dedicate an episode to systems thinking and value streams and how we see the correlations and connections there, because there's a lot to pick apart. So what do we think about what's in it for the listener of the podcast? Like, what do we think we're going to be able to help out with? Or, from my perspective, I think this is hopefully sparking some discussions, right? I mean, I think what's really great about a podcast is when you start a conversation based on a podcast. You say, I heard about this. What do you think? Did you hear, did you see this episode? What are your thoughts? How does that resonate with you? What do you think, Andrew, is like the value that we can hopefully provide to listeners from the podcast?
I mean, what I am hopeful of is that if you're a technologist in some form, like Steve and I, you'll recognize that there are these broader, deeper concepts that where you might have suspected that there was something wrong or something suboptimal, or felt a sense of frustration that you didn't know why the company couldn't operate in a more efficient way, or people didn't understand, people were struggling to see the context or understand the context in which they were working, the benefit they were delivering to the customer, and so forth. Really, I think our goal is to broaden the mental aperture for technology leaders, managers, developers, directors, and so forth in organizations, looking at trying to figure out how they fit into the broader business and how they can find a language, like, as you said, a common terminology to communicate in these terms. It absolutely needs to become part of our language as technologists, not just saying, hey, how many deployments do you have and so forth, but we can say, did we reduce the time to value? Did we reduce the lead time? Are we directly delivering customer value and so forth? Then we can begin to find a common language that can help the rest of the business become more sympathetic to the concerns within IT, if there's areas we need to improve, and also help us to begin to realize what we're really doing. We're not just sitting here playing games on computers all day long. I mean, games of building systems, building applications, and so forth. It's not just building for building's sake. We're all part of this broader system, whether that system is the organization or the overall marketplace in which you're operating.
Yeah, I think that part about, being able to sort of build a better model of what an organization looks like and how it functions is really valuable. I mean, that's been transformational for me personally, and being a technical leader, I felt myself kind of wandering in the wilderness with a lot of this stuff before I had that model to lean on. So there's like that personal aspect of it. It's just sorting it out in your own head and coming up with a way of thinking these things through, or, building that picture of what is it. We have the org chart, right? This is something we always talk about, is the org chart versus like how the company actually functions, what's actually happening. And, having the org chart means that you've got to sort of fit your thinking into this structure that's very static and doesn't represent how things actually happen. It might represent the political landscape, but not the actual like functional landscape. So I think that that individual capability of being able to model an organization is super critical, and it's just so much easier with the value stream as a model. But then it's also to your point, that idea that you could just have better conversations with, everybody from a new hire, to people in other organizations, in your leadership in your organization, your peers in your organization, your team members that report to you, other divisions and departments, um, new acquisitions. If you find yourself talking to a company that was just acquired by your organization, one of the first things you want to know is like, how do things actually work for you? How do you see your organization? And if you're just looking at the org chart, I think you're really struggling to have a productive conversation about that, because that'll show you how things are sort of ought to be, or in a specific lens. Like you've got a specific view, but the value stream is really where you get to what should we do? What should we do next? Where are we headed? What do we see as like an ideal? So, I think, and I hope that through these conversations, we're able to kind of provide listeners with models and language and examples and cases and stories about bridging that gap between kind of wandering in the wilderness or not feeling entirely confident that you've got an understanding of your current state, your future state, and the path, and how to navigate. And I think that if we can do that well, we'll be very successful. But any final thoughts, Andrew? We should probably wrap pretty soon.
As always, I enjoy these conversations, and grateful for the chance to share these thoughts with everybody else. So hopefully this helps the listeners in terms of getting some context on Steve and I, our backgrounds, and where the show is going. And we'll look forward to sharing more thoughts in future episodes.